Welcome, everybody. This is another episode of Event Marketing Redefined. I am your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. And today we have a show about inclusivity and diversity at events and how to accomplish that and create better events. My guest today is Cooper Cheatham, and he is the brand activation manager for Perrier. Cooper, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Hey, Matt, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Cool. I think you have a really cool job, right? So you're the brand activation manager. You actually work for InMade, but you are designated to Perrier, which is a big brand, super well known. Everybody knows it. And what I love about your role is that you are like just so specifically the brand activation manager, and you are working on these activations. That's really what we're going to talk about today. The activation world is taking off, and I think people in marketing really want to understand how good activations are being executed, how they're being developed, how they're being run, and really what success looks like. So give me just brief background on yourself.
Yeah, so I have over a decade working within the drink space, starting out right out of college at a small brand named St. Germain, where we did everything in-house. Especially, I was running the events for New York City as well as our larger events around the country. And we literally did everything from twisting and juicing our lemons for our cocktails to serving them to everything else. So I definitely got some really wonderful foundational experience there that allowed me to open up my own business. I had my own experiential marketing agency for a little over 4 years, almost 5. And then I, took a step away from that with hotels and hospitality and understanding guest experience, as well as ways.
Yeah. You were the experience director, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool.
Then that gave me a whole new idea and a whole new look on the way that brands and activations can really come to life. Then got back into the drink space, working for Perrier now.
Really cool. Tell me a little bit about that. This is a bit offbeat here, but I'm interested. The director of experience, right? In that hotel hospitality space, what exactly were you doing? Because I love hotels. I love going to different hotels, experiencing them, walking around them. I'm really into that.
Yeah, from both of the hotel brands that I worked at, I was focused on our guest experience and what that looked like, from the creative that we had within the common spaces, the public spaces, to the design elements, the artistic elements, and then also what the brand looks like online as well. I firmly believe that your first experience with the brand is the first time that you see it. So whether that be a postcard or a post online or whatever it might be, that's going to be your first experience. That's going to set the standard from everything beyond that. So within the hotel, thinking about holistically 360, what is a guest experience like? What do they think when they see the front desk agents dressed in a certain way? What is the paper quality like? What are the books?
Paper quality. That is some detail, Cooper. I love that.
Oh yes, always.
Nice.
So that was really, really amazing. And also handling all the content capture for our web, for our social media, for our F&B outlets. It definitely helped my own eye when it comes to photo and video when you're at an event or at an activation. So is again that holistic experience, like how is a guest in here? What is their journey like? What is it like after they leave? What is the communications like after that? So yeah, again, it was touching on every touch point.
I love that. And I asked it hoping you would nail on those points, because what I think is so cool about that is that hotels are kind of reverse engineering the experience by putting people like you in those seats. They want to say, like, we're not chancing your experience. We're going to go down to the detail of the paper and the materials and the whole 9 yards. And I talk a lot of times on this show, and I urge event marketers and marketers and people to reverse engineer their events. Reverse engineer the experience. I use the example of retail. I use the example of hotels all the time. Like, your experience is mapped already. Now, they may not nail that map every single time, but they're trying. Like, they're creating it ahead of time. So I think that's super cool. I'm glad I asked you about that. I think it's just incredible experience for you rolling into what you're now doing. So brand activation manager with InMade specifically for Perrier. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing on the regular, and what the role looks like?
Yeah, so on the regular, it's handling, I'm the brand activation manager for Perrier in New York City, but also handling larger brand activations, larger brand planning for, the whole country. So for some of our larger activations like New York Fashion Week or World's 50 Best, which just took place here, or World's 50 Best North America, which just took place here in New York this summer, our Convent Brooklyn, et cetera, et cetera. It's thinking about what our brand experience is going to be like, what our activation setup is going to be like, who our BAs are going to be like, and then like who we invite to that event as well to kind of capture our experience. So that is on the larger end of it. But then on the smaller end, working with our image accounts and our marketing efforts that we have with them. So we develop relationships with key accounts to there's like one element of it that it's like a sales strategy to bring into the bars, restaurants, and venues. But the other element of it is helping and being a part of building their brand. And that kind of brand alignment of, there's a really awesome Peruvian cocktail bar that's going to do a pop-up at one of our image accounts, Lamasan in the West Village. How do we show up for that? How do we support our Lamasan? And then being able to tie the guest experience with Perrier, with the amazing pop-up event. So, smaller scale, large scale, and then kind of everything in between.
I love the intention that goes into what you do, right? Small event, big event, doesn't matter. Like if Perrier is going to show up, there's going to be meaning behind it. And there's a person like yourself and others working on these partnerships and working on how are we showing up in front of people face to face. I just, I try to urge that all the time with people listening to this show, whether it's trade show, whether it's events, whether it's summits, whether it's activations, like that is a must in all event marketing. How do you show up, the intention, the why? It's a good rundown. Let's jump into some of your partnerships and the things that you work on, like New York Fashion Week, Governor's Ball, right? And kind of how Perrier partners. And I'd love to hear some examples, and I'd love to hear like some goals and objectives that get created for those so that these activations are a success.
Yeah, totally. So looking at what we've done with New York Fashion Week these last several seasons, especially coming out of the pandemic, it's creating a space, essentially having Perrier bar, having brand ambassadors there to be able to distribute product. And then as part of our larger partnership, we had Perrier fridges throughout the venues. It's branded beautifully, co-branded with New York Fashion Week. So understanding what Perrier is going to look like on site with the fridges, with how people are going to consume it. And then for the events themselves, the way that we were stationed right by where the shows are coming and going. So having our brand ambassadors dressed chicly, if you will, Perrier green, and then being able for the high-heeled guests coming and going to grab a Perrier. And then in terms of adding on to it is that working with influencers and other creators who are tapped into the fashion space and lifestyle space, inviting them as guests of Perrier to just enjoy the shows and then amplify our own message of being there as well. That's what our live partnerships look like, for example, with New York Fashion Week, and then of course extends to content, the type of content that New York Fashion Week would put out on behalf of Perrier, and then how we would amplify it in our own channels. Our influencers then could also be captured by New York Fashion Week for some of their items as well. So it's trying to find the most synergistic opportunities that are also going to be well received by each of the online communities as well. Kind of like forcing a square peg in a round hole is like, we want to do our cocktail content on New York Fashion Week feeds, which doesn't really resonate with their following, and our own followers aren't necessarily going to see that. So it's finding what makes sense for everybody.
It's almost like a synergy, right? Between the two. How are you selecting these events? How are you selecting these partnerships? Obviously the synergy in terms of what you're both looking for. Is there anything specific that you guys, any standards that you have or things that, are really like a guideline for you?
Yeah, with event marketing on its own, it's always looking for what the consumers are, what the larger event is, what the ways that we would show up there, and understanding the cultural moment that's behind it. And so with Perrier specifically, what I'm tasked with and the rest of the brand activation team is integrating our brand into these cultural moments that happen in New York City or in LA or Miami, Chicago, Houston, Dallas, et cetera. So with selecting GovBall or New York Fashion Week or the Frieze Art Fair, we want to make sure that they are being attended by our target demographics, which are creatives, creators, older Gen Z, millennials, and plus. So making sure that it's a cultural moment that makes sense, that it is the demographics that we want to be a part of and want to be, consumed by, and then being a part of that cultural conversation as well.
That's cool. I think in there you mentioned, that cultural moment behind it. I love that, right? Because the fact that you're paying attention to that, I think is big. We talked prior, and I think, the cultural moment brings me to thinking of something like, you were just talking about Art Basel, right? And you were just there, and Perrier was there. Give us a little rundown of that. Art Basel's a big event, right? It's a big happening. It is a cultural thing for sure. How was it? Give me your thoughts. What did Perrier do? Anything cool go on?
Yeah, so Perrier definitely painted Miami green.
Nice.
Our Miami team definitely knocked it out of the park. Over the last few years, they've developed a really awesome relationship with Art Basel organization. So the official sparkling water of Art Basel. And so with that being available for sale within inside the fair, as well as complimentary sampling within inside the fair, and then being able to have an activation space within the botanical gardens, which is right next to it. So it's a beautiful way to be outside, experience the gorgeous weather of Miami, and then to have a multi-sensory experience as well. This year was what we call a sensorium, because our focus has been on Perrier flavors. So what does it mean and our tagline was feel the flavor for the year. So what does it mean to feel the flavor? What does it mean to show up at Art Basel in Miami? What does it mean to also have a draw, so that way when people see something online, they want to be like, I want to go check that out. It's a complimentary, moment. I can have some Perrier. It can be in the botanical gardens. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So
sounds good to me. I'm just listening to you,
right?
Tell me about it. Yeah, it sounds great. I love Perrier, so yeah.
Yeah, so that was one of our larger activations, but then we also had partnerships with some of our F&B partners in Miami. So we partnered with Lifehouse Hotels for 2 of their spaces in Miami, at the Layla at the Kayak Hotel and Pretty Swell at their other property. So finding ways to integrate within the F&B scene as well, because people are going to be out eating and people are going to be eating a drink. So understanding how to be a part of those. So those were just 2 of our larger F&B partnerships, but then we had a media partnership that also listed out all the different bars and restaurants where Perrier is available and produced a lot of content around it, also gave advertising and promotion to our F&B partners. So again, when people are going out and about, they're seeing Perrier on the streets, they'll go to a restaurant, they see Perrier there. So it's, being everywhere. And then beyond that, providing product and sponsoring pretty much every other art fair and then other parties and events. So really, really, really being deeply and profoundly a part of the cultural moment of Art Basel. And hats off to the Miami team for executing all of it. My own component of it was managing our influencer partnerships. And
yeah, I was just going to ask that. I was going to say that's like a hot topic right now. I think it's a very cool piece of where marketing and activating is going, is using the power of influencers, finding the synergies. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we had 2 different lunches that I was overseeing and managing. And that's also one thing too, is that for Perrier, we're going for that afternoon moment when you want a pick-me-up, when you need a refresher, especially around 3:00, you need to step away from your computer or step away from whatever you're designing or drawing or creating. So going for that daytime moment and that pick-me-up moment. So of course, lunch is the best opportunity. So one was with 2 amazing national influencers that we work with, Amy Kelly and Chelsea Enriquez. They hosted a lunch for us, inviting a bunch of local influencers from Miami. And it was a great way just to bring people together and to focus on what we're calling Perrier with a twist, which is ice cold Perrier in a glass with either a slice of citrus or some herbs or something along those lines. And it's Perrier with a twist. So we got to bring people together to have a really beautiful lunch, and then got a bunch of amazing content out of it and got to make some really awesome relationships that are going to live beyond this moment now, because everyone loves water. It loves Perrier especially. And then the other influencer lunch that we hosted was with the artist Deanna Nunez, and she was celebrating her first piece of art in any of the art fairs during Art Basel. And so she was celebrating her first piece in the Scope Art Fair, and which was a celebratory moment. So we hosted a celebratory lunch for her where she got to bring together
That's
her
cool.
Exactly. Yeah. Got to bring together her friends and other folks who have also been on her journey with her, but then are also on their own journey and are also killing it in their own sense and becoming notable in their own fields. So it was cool to be able to celebrate her success, her friend's success, and everyone on the journey together. And during her speech, she said, we talked about these moments. We talked about this moment right here of coming together, celebrating everything that we're doing, celebrating what I'm doing. And it's so amazing that, Perrier gets to is celebrating us. So it was, two different types of influencer lunches, but two very different meaningful opportunities as well, which I think is smart. Anytime that you're doing anything with influencers or content creators or notable people, is understanding who they are and what they want, what they don't want, what they like, what they don't like, and how to integrate in a more authentic and organic way, instead of trying to just, get a piece of content and then move on to the next.
I wrote this note, which I think is cool because, I like to talk about extending the life of an event, right? Because when you're there physically, it's great and people want to be face to face and there's so much value in it. But I think nowadays it is about, okay, do you have a strategy? Do you have things where you can extend the life of it? And I think the more I'm thinking about this influencer style marketing and activating campaigns is, you are creating content. And to your point, which I think is incredible, make it authentic, right? Can you make this partnership so that the content's authentic and it's not some phony, cheesy type of thing? When you do that, that content now has a lot of reach, which is the idea of influencers, right? But potentially that extends the life of the event for the brand, which I think is really, really cool and shows really what the power of that influencer and that kind of activating is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's relationship building, because I think so many brands want to just get a piece of content because this person has a huge following and then they're on to the next. Whereas I think it's, the influencers onto the next, the content creators onto the next, the brands onto the next. But like, if you can build a long-term relationship and can, support someone on their successes or work with them over multiple different projects, then for me, there's a lot of other organic opportunities that come along. And there's some folks that I've worked with that have become good friends of mine too, but it's like, hire them to create some amazing reels and then work with them on something else. And then they're doing events on their own. And then they're hitting me up on the side being like, hey, could you actually send some Perrier to this? Or, hey, would you want to be a part of this? And then you get, it extends the content. So the paid opportunities work together, but then those other opportunities naturally present themselves where it's like, especially with those sometimes other on the sly opportunities, sending a couple of cases and you're incredible content in front of a bunch of amazing other influential people, not just influencers, but actual like influential people. And the product in their hands. So that's why I think that approaching any sort of influencer relationship, partnership, et cetera, should be what's the longevity of it and how can we continue to work together beyond this one project?
You seem like you have a really good grasp on it. And I like, what you're saying about like the reciprocal nature of it when you do it the right way. And it's almost like anything, right? You don't want it to be transactional. Anything that's transactional is transactional, right? And so you're talking about having it be more authentic, more value driven, more of a partnership. And even in something like you would say influencer, whatever, marketing, campaigning, activating, whatever you want to call it, when you do it the right way, like anything else in life, now you're talking about, okay, it opens up more opportunities. And I think the fact that you guys have done that with Perrier is awesome. It's really cool. Let's get to some of the good stuff here. We did, I know, we've gone on here a little bit, but diversity and inclusivity at events. When you and I had spoke prior and we're kind of talking about, the things we wanted to talk about and everything, I thought you just spoke really well about this topic and kind of why it's important. But then I think people will talk about why it's important, but also like the value that it drives, I think is really interesting. So give me a little bit of like why you think diversity and inclusivity is important at events. I think it's an obvious, but I do want to hear your thoughts on it. Right. And then what kind of like, why is it beneficial?
Yeah, why it's important at events is that you want to have more people there. You want to have different types of people. And, for a product like Perrier or other CPGs, the end goal is ultimately to sell more. So if you aren't diversifying who you're reaching and who is seeing your product, then your one demographic that you're, kind of advertising to or trying to work with, they'll get tired of you after a while, and your sales will dip. So there's that like very simple element of it, the very basic element of it. But then at events themselves, how do I say this? It's just more fun when there's different types of people around. And then you also putting the influencer lens or the creator lens or influential person lens on it, is that you're tapping into their communities as well. And then when people see the content output, whether it be the brand's own video or photos or from the folks themselves, then they're seeing that, wow, this was actually a cool event. There was different types of people there. And then different, diverse people see other people that are like them in the photography, in the imagery, in the event recaps, whatever it might be. Then they think, oh, like this actually is something that's for me. This is a product that's for me. This is something that I could or should, and I want to now consume. So those basic optics around it are super important. And then having more people there of diverse nature, again, it just makes it more fun, in my opinion. That's the New Yorker in me talking, but
I thought you made a really good point when we spoke. You kind of really, I never really thought of this. We're talking about like actual events and things of that nature, like when people have summits and speakers and conferences. And you brought up the idea of like ones that you've worked on and things where by having diverse speakers is you just get this wide view and perspective. When you create diversity in your speaking, just as a specific example, if you have an event with 6 keynotes, you can't have the same type of individual give all 6 of the keynotes because you're just going to get a different version of maybe the same story. Whereas when you have diversity, you are getting different perspectives, and perspectives, I think, is what keeps people open-minded. It's what challenges people the way they think. And that really hit me when you had told me that. I'm like, man, that's just a great point. I mean, I've never run an event to the degree where I'm selecting the speakers, so I never really thought about it. So I thought that was a really good point.
Yeah, thank you. It is, especially with keynote speakers, with panelists, with all of that, as we discussed previously, it is so important. The multitude of voices, the multitude of perspectives will only make something better. And if you look at the products, or if you look at the communities, or if you look at, organizations that actually have diverse leaders, then they're able to bring in different points of view and then are able to make it stronger and better. And you'll also be able to find different blind spots within your own marketing, within your own event, within your own execution. And then also you can learn about blind spots within yourself. So as we discussed, just the multitude of perspectives. And then also it draws in more people to your event as well, because as I touched on earlier, if someone sees that there's someone like them at the event, then they're going to be more willing to listen. They're going to be more willing to buy that ticket. They're going to be more willing to actually show up versus, a homogenous looking group that's on whatever the advertising or flyer or whatever it is. It's generally people are going to see it. And if they're not like that homogenous group, they're going to be like, that's not for me.
Yeah.
And so it's making sure to open doors and making sure to make people feel like they're included and that whatever it is actually for them.
And I think for brands, that's really important, right? Like, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I think for a brand, it's really important, not that they have to take a stance on every single thing, but it's important for that diversity and inclusivity it's important in general, but just as a brand, I think specifically on this topic, I think it's important. I was actually just at a conference for my industry, and they brought in a woman. I don't want to mess her name up, but it's Tashelle Lawson, and you can look her up on LinkedIn. Black woman from Atlanta. She was just awesome. Really loved her. And I thought she gave just a really great talk on a difficult topic, right? About hiring, diversity, and some really good in-depth details inside of it. But I ended up talking to her that night at the party for like maybe half hour. And we just had an awesome conversation. And having that there, which that event is a predominantly white event for sure, like our industry without question, right? So having her there, having her give that talk, totally different perspective, totally different thought process on things. And then being able to speak to her that night about just all kinds of stuff. It's just great. Like, it's just a good example of me being an attendee of an event and appreciating the fact that they brought somebody in, exactly, diversity and inclusivity. So it actually, I didn't think about it as we were just talking just now. Maybe I should have been more prepared, but I'm just thinking about it now. Like, I just experienced it last week, and it was really, really good. I appreciated her perspective. It got me thinking, and it was different content. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the difference perspective, it's the learning, it's the interaction, it's the exchange of ideas as well, which I think is so important, because if you're just hearing and receiving the same information, the same thing, then you're not going to innovate. Whereas if you're able to actually have authentic, real exchange of ideas, and then as someone who is receiving the information from any type of speaker, it helps you think of new ideas. It helps you innovate. It helps you grow. It helps you break free of, traditional patterns. And I think there's so much within our industry, within events, especially, where it's kind of the same thing over and over, like a big room, people in a big room drinking, and that's it. And whereas if you have, Whereas if you have different ideas and different perspectives and different folks, then you can make that big room with a bunch of people standing around into something that's memorable and fun and exciting.
That's a good point. What it makes me think of is about, I do my live show every 2 weeks, right? And we get attendees and guests and such. And had one show, maybe it was a month ago, and there was an attendee, a woman that was on there. I don't know her, but she came on the show, and you're talking about like different perspectives, right? And she asked this question about networking at trade shows and big conferences and summits. And she's like, I don't drink. So she's like, what do I do? How do I get involved? Now I do drink, right? I do partake in evening, I've been overserved before, right? So I just never even thought, I legit never even thought of it. So she asked this question on the show, and I was like, oh man. And I was kind of stumped. But then it got my brain turning, thinking like, well, events probably need to do a better job of orchestrating maybe breakfast round tables or different things that is not just dependent on you being at the hotel bar that night or at the after party so you can network. They, to have other place, because there is the diversity, the inclusivity in all different spectrums. When she asked that, I was like, oh, wow, I never thought of that. But,
yeah,
it's great.
Totally. Right there. Yeah. And that is, as you said, like maybe it's a morning thing, or maybe it's a lunch moment, or whatever it might be, but to provide authentic ways for people to connect outside of that nighttime bar, club venue experience.
Don't get me wrong. I've had some great evening conversations, right, with people and stuff like that when drinking. But yes, being able to allow those different perspectives for somebody else, I think is cool. What do you think about like implementation advice for event marketers, people working on brand activations, for inclusivity, diversity? Like, what would you recommend to them if they're running their own thing, or, what direction would you point them in?
I would say if you don't have a diverse network of vendors or talent or other folks that you work with, then look outside of it. Ask for advice. If you go to an event and you see someone, and diversity and inclusion isn't just on the guest facing side, but it's also on the back end too. It's also,
that's a good point. That's a great point.
The vendors that you're working with, where do they come from? What is their background? Understanding who you're working with and look beyond that. And then if you find yourself in a rut, just working with the same folks over and over again, and you need to expand, especially when it comes to those front-facing opportunities. Like, I hire bartenders and mixologists for events all the time, and I am always making sure that they are, coming up. That's not two white dudes and that's it. I want to have diversity in gender expression. I want to have diversity in ethnic background. I want to have diversity in sexual identity and sex. And so trying to be as diverse as possible that way. But then again, on the back end, look for different agencies to work with, look for different talent to work with. If you see something, especially online, you see something that's super cool or that you would like to emulate, reach out to those folks, get them involved. So it's looking beyond who and what you have and what you know, and then actively working to diversify your end product. I think that's the biggest thing, is just, especially in events, it can get really busy and you have your go-tos. And but if you actually care about doing the work, then you have to put in the work to diversify it.
It's a good point. You know what it makes me think of is sort of like the idea where people kind of gravitate to people like themselves. It's just natural, right? Like when you meet someone that has a personality like you, like I'm attracted and I gravitate towards people with like a little bit of high energy, people that are gregarious, people that are idea people. It's just who I am, right? So that makes me think, for an event marketer running event, you know, whatever it is you're doing, if you're creating activation, suppliers, guests, speakers, is maybe looking a little bit outside of just something you're comfortable with because they're like you per se, right? Because that can open your thoughts up to maybe selecting somebody that, you know, is in the space of saying, we are going to create a more diverse and inclusive event. And then you're going to get those outside perspectives, outside opinions, outside just view of the way things run. And I think that might help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
That just kind of hit me. I don't know why. I was thinking about that because we were talking about it just in our sales meeting the other day. So one thing that I always like to close with people like yourself, right, is, you know, the community that we're trying to put together here with event marketers and people that are doing this work is, I find a lot of people don't really learn event marketing. They don't get taught it, college, things like that. They just get thrown into it. And there's a lot of young people that like marketing, like events. They're event planners, they're this and that, but they end up just getting tossed a bag from their boss and they're like, hey, figure this out.
That was me.
See, that's what I'm saying. It does happen. So give me advice to your younger self, right? Give me advice to your younger self that you think would help an aspiring event marketer, or maybe just another event marketer.
Advice to my younger self or to any other marketer. I have a couple pieces of advice. One is, think about the guest journey. What is check-in going to be like? Is there someone, and then once you start thinking about those elements, like what is check-in going to be like? Is there someone managing check-in? Will the venue have that? Or do I need to hire someone? What? Is it cold? Will there be coat check? Is there, thinking about the journey, and then when they get in, what is their first experience? Is it a drink? Is it food? Is it a sign? What does the sign say? Thinking about all those elements, and then how do people end? Like, do they get a gift bag? What's in the gift bag? How is it going to be presented? How is it going to be branded? Then how do they leave? What is the coat check experience going to be like as they're leaving? And then, if
I really like that one, by the way, I don't want to interrupt you, but I like that one because it goes back to what we originally talked about, which is reverse engineering, like the customer experience, mapping it. And I think it does take experienced person like yourself to be thinking about that. Sometimes when people just get involved, right, they just want it to just go well. They just want everything to go, but they don't think about that stuff. To me, that's a little next high level. It's like, okay, I'm this attendee. I come walking up. What's my experience like? So I think that's excellent advice right there.
And then if you have an event too, I've worked with many different types of venues, and some venues have everything that you would need, and then other venues have nothing. And sometimes, especially if you're on like a
sounds
tour,
like a bad venue.
Yeah, you'd be, or like, a venue that's like, oh, we don't have anything, but you can rent it from us for X, Y, and Z. So, everyone's trying to make $1, but especially when you're on tour, what I found super useful is having a checklist that listing out all the things that you would need for the event and like where it's coming from. So asking those questions, like, do you have sinks that we can use for running water to batch cocktails? What is the trash going to be like? Who's going to be taking out the trash? Do we need to hire staff? Do you have staff? Even bathroom attendants, all those details, because you can get used to like, oh, well, I'm used to this always being provided for. I've been caught, unfortunately, like it's assuming that certain elements were going to be provided, but they weren't. So make a checklist, everything that you need, and then ask those questions from the venue, because that'll be game changer for you, especially as you're doing touring events. And another piece of advice that, like, even sometimes to this day, it like slips my mind is, what is post-event pickup like? How am I going to get my bar back? How am I going to get my leftover product? Like all of that. And sometimes, it gets lost in the weeds until you're at the event itself. Everything's going and it's like, oh, how am I going to get, like, what's pickup like? Does that have to be loaded out to like the night of? So make sure that that's load in is as just as important as load out, or load out is just as important as load in. So make sure that you understand those, because otherwise I've been caught in tricky situations where I'm like, oh, I gotta get all my stuff out tonight. I was assuming I could send someone tomorrow. Like,
a lot of tricky situations in events, right? It's a think on your feet, planning type of industry, deadline driven industry. Cooper, this was fun. I think you really dropped some really good nuggets. The influencer piece that you spoke about and the authenticity and the way that's working right now, I think people are really going to take a lot of value from that. You have a really good handle on that. It's really cool to see. And then, some of the stuff with the inclusivity and the diversity at events and just sort of, how to make your events and activations more beneficial through that, I think is really good stuff. And I appreciate you being here today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you, man.
Got it. Cooper, thank you. Everybody, that's a wrap. This is Event Marketing Redefined. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time. Thank you so much.